The cult of Baal,
Oh, yes.
B-A-L. My family masqueraded themselves as Jewish publicly, but behind closed doors, at Passover dinners, when I was drugged, would admit, we are Satanists. They told me that we belonged to the cult of Baal, B-A-apostrophe-A-L. They told me this with consistency while I was being abused. Now, what you can look up about the cult of Baal, information that is publicly available, is that it is thousands of years old. It is a Phoenician satanic fertility cult. And publicly, it's supposed to have been eradicated. But to my knowledge and my experience, it is not. This is what people perceive the Illuminati to be. It is a group of elites that practices forced and uses these crimes to control people. They happen to have a huge reach over politics and entertainment. To answer your basic question, why my family does this, because it was done to them, because having one man bear as many children in a generation as possible and forcing them through these traumatic events, they believe it creates a stronger bond, that creates more loyalty, that it keeps people from talking. And for the most part, they're right, because I'm the only one of my siblings who has directly spoken out about this. There are people who have hinted at it in their music. Of course, Justin Bieber has talked about being assaulted by Usher and Justin Timberlake at P. Diddy's parties, but I don't think it's a coincidence they've only gone after Sean Combs and not his other alleged perpetrators who were born into the bloodline. There seems to be a level of protection for people who are simply born into that world, contrasted with people like Sean Combs or R. Kelly, who joined as adults. But I was not in the boardrooms. I was a child on drugs. So I can't tell you exactly who organizes this, exactly how it happens. It's just speculation and memory.
And yeah, you're a very powerful speaker and you're very well researched. And we've had a lot of survivors come on. And we salute you, for the level of detail and knowledge that you have. I think it was David Icke who woke me up to the ancient cults and the bloodlines that continue to these generations. And I think you're the first survivor, perhaps, who's actually detailed how that has continued over the ages. So if you could maybe expand on that a little bit, I think the viewers would find this fascinating.
What specifically would you like expanded on?
So what was the cult that you mentioned earlier, the ancient one?
The cult of Baal, B-A-L.
Yes.
B-A-L.
Yep.
I know very little about it. My family masqueraded themselves as Jewish publicly. But behind closed doors, at Passover dinners, when I was drugged, would admit, we are Satanists. Now, what I can understand is the public has caught on to this, but they call them the Illuminati, who are illuminated to the cult of Baal, who has successfully mythologized themselves as the Illuminati and convinced people that they are shape-shifting reptilians, myths that can be perpetuated by the psychedelic nature of the tool that they use to abuse victims, which is used to delegitimize people who catch on to what they have been doing. And to be truthful, it was a reason I was anxious to come on here. When people talk about seeing men turn into lizards, it makes everything seem a little bit more delegitimate. Now, when someone has been given a powerful drug, their minds can experience something like that. They can witness something like that. And it's something that kept me very confused as a child. I'm in the material world, in this plane. I'm being assaulted by my father, my uncles, my cousins. But my mind is somewhere else. My mind is going on this fantasy ride. And when I awake, I'm very confused. I also believe there are people who have talked about these outlandish, metaphysical, impossible experiences intentionally to derail conversations about the cults and their power in media and politics.
How prevalent are these Satanists in high society, and are they disguised?
Yes. They control so much more than I think even I can understand. I told you my father boasted that his grandfather was Walt Disney. Now, I remember when Viacom bought Fox, but Fox held a hard line on not selling the news station. Steve raged and cried for a month because that would have been a full monopoly on the American news market. I remember meeting all sorts of politicians, American and foreign, and entertainers.
I think the viewers would be very curious then about Jeffrey, and what's your view on his role in the apparatus?
My understanding is that I met him in Aspen in 2007. And that was a reintroduction. My father said, "Hey, remember your Uncle Jeffrey?" And Jeffrey said, "Hey, Anya, it's great to see you again." Jelaine was there. What they told me was that Jeffrey worked for Stephen. And as I've said, he is guilty for what he did to those teenage girls here in New York City and down in Florida. On St. Andrews. But I do not believe he was in charge of orchestrating what has been going on in our family for generations. With my experiences, I believe he wanted to talk more about the other parties involved. And I know he didn't kill himself. I'm not sure whether they let him go and get plastic surgery and flee the country, or if they did kill him. But I do believe he was a pawn, and that his story blew up in the media to keep people from looking beyond him. If Jeffrey was the one villain in charge of it, then, oh, he's dead, it's all over, everything's good now. And that leaves my father free to continue 3-year-olds and running Viacom from behind a veil while his paralegal runs his divorce practice, as he bragged about to me growing up.
So you're saying that Jeffrey wasn't involved in the full-on occult practices. He was just part of a machine, and then they just used him to make an example out of?
He was involved in the full-on occult practices, but not necessarily of his own volition. I have memories of men being forced to assault me when they didn't want to. I remember one man, this brilliant comedic actor, actually his better dramatic work. My father's screaming at him, telling him to penetrate me, and he makes one thrust and backs away, and my father gets outraged and says, "You're going to come. You're going to come." And this poor man is crying throughout it, and I'm barely conscious. Jeffrey may have been involved in the full-on occult practices, but he's not one of the hardcore of this sickness where they are actually attracted to small children.
Yeah, Lady C mentioned that as well, about a hebephile or something versus. So in terms of Maxwell then, who do you think, what do you think her role was?
I think she enjoyed it, much like my stepmother did. I think she is as guilty of as Jeffrey was. But I didn't know her very well. I don't even remember a conversation with her. I remember seeing her. I think she got off on the power of it. I think with men who engage in hebephilia, it's more of a sickness that arises from their own abuse. Like my grandfather, my alleged grandfather, Walt's son, who worked for the CIA, allegedly faked his death to remove himself from my mother because he was so sickened by what he could not control doing to her. I contrast that with my stepmother, who delighted in abusing me and laughed at me when I was incapacitated by the drug they had me on, and made fun of me drooling on myself, being unable to speak. I think with her and with Ghislaine, I'm certain they were abused as children themselves, but there's a different kind of psychopathy that grows within them where they get off on the power of it and abetting in these acts to please their partners. Now, Kari Epstein was more sexually attracted to me than she was to her husband, Stephen. But she did also do these things in order to stay in good graces with him. And that was more out of survival. Kari was a very broke cellist in her early adulthood with no familial support, whereas Ghislaine also comes from the aristocracy. She had access to her own funds independent of Jeffrey, so I can't speculate too much on what she gained from it out of psychopathic pleasure and sadism. A schadenfreude of sorts. But I'm not a doctor. She was not a large presence in my life. And that speculation on her personality is primarily based on what I know about my stepmother.
So would you say then that some of the techniques used on you would be classified under the MK Ultra program?
Yes. Absolutely.
Could you explain that? Could you explain that for viewers who are not familiar with MK Ultra?
Okay. These drugs were administered to me when I was an infant. Macro doses were given every single time I was assaulted. And I was kept on micro doses the rest of the time in my waking life, to maintain some control, some separation from my peers. I actually didn't realize until very recently that I was kept on micro doses, that I was kept on a small dose in my regular waking life. Upon analysis of what would happen when I went on school trips away from Denver for a few days at a time, we would take trips to Washington, D.C. or New York or California. On those trips, after 3 or 4 days, I would actually start getting along with my classmates. And they'd be amazed. They'd say, "Wait, Anya, you're really cool and fun. And we like hanging out with you." And I would end up being the center of the group and not understand why suddenly I'm connecting socially. But then we'd go back home. I'd see my family again. And the next time at school or at synagogue, I'd feel in my own weird little bubble again. So I was put on these large doses designed to knock me out when I was assaulted. Small doses to keep me complacent the rest of the time. What this did essentially was sever my memory. Everything that happened to me, everything that was boasted about to me, that occurred on those large doses was locked away in what I thought was a nightmare fantasy world. I was primarily unconscious for the physical assaults. And if I was awake, I was so high, I thought it was my own nightmares. This ensured I wasn't going to go telling anybody about it. This ensured I thought I was sick. My family does this. The Cult of Baal does this. They do MK Ultra because forging these trauma bonds forges more loyalty. And 99 times out of 100, victims will choose being with other victims over trying to speak to eventually prevent there being more victims. And I'm talking to you because the children who are going through it right now, one day, are going to wonder why nobody cared enough to try to stop it, to try to say something. Now they'll either find me or they will choose to keep their mouths shut because they will understand why, for the most part, victims of MK Ultra choose loyalty over truth.